For the latest now, let's bring in our correspondent Kate Fisher, who is in Washington following the Trump campaign for us, as well as our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Good day to both of you, and thank you for being here with me this afternoon as we unpack really the U.S. elections. I'm going to begin with the news that's just in then at the moment. Let me start with you, Kate. Biden taking the lead there in Pennsylvania. Things not looking very good for the Republicans. I mean, Trump did have a sort of decent lead in Pennsylvania. I mean, it must be quite surprising to even the Biden camp that Biden did manage indeed to catch up. And it would be quite great, isn't it, for Biden if he goes ahead with Pennsylvania once it's called?
Yeah, it is looking increasingly like Joe Biden is heading to take the keys of the House behind me here. But that is not going down well inside the House behind me here, because that is where Donald Trump is watching all of this unfold. Out here, there are new posters and protesters celebrating the fact that most people seem to think that Joe Biden is heading for victory, and they are clearly pleased that Donald Trump may be about to vacate the White House, well, in January next year, if the vote counting continues to go the way it is. We know that Donald Trump is not happy about this. Not only did he appear on television last night to say so, but his campaign has just released a statement this morning saying that this election is not over and that it is a false projection to suggest that Joe Biden is going to win. The results, they say, are far from final. They have alleged that there have been votes in Georgia that have been improperly harvested, and they intend to call for a recount in that state. Of course, Georgia is a state that has been ruby red for many years, and a Democrat hasn't won there since 1992, a Democratic presidential candidate. But here you see Joe Biden appears to have made progress and appears to, well, he is in the lead and appears to be holding that lead. So Donald Trump threatening that this to throw more legal action at these counts in Pennsylvania as well, and in Nevada, where he says that there have been thousands of ballots improperly cast, and he said that he expects to win the state of Arizona.
Well, let's come to you, Sherwin. I mean, it's a surprise as Pennsylvania goes blue, as Kate does indicate there, having not voted Democrat since, I believe, Bill Clinton. What does this then say about Joe Biden's popularity? But on the back of that, Sherwin, just about talking about Trump, it sounds crazy at this point when people are kind of already starting to celebrate the Joe Biden victory. But what would have to happen for things to turn in Trump's favor, for the tide to turn in favor of Trump at this point as we speak, as people have already kind of called it, really, that Joe Biden has already won?
I mean, I think you're referring to the state of Georgia that hasn't voted for a Democratic candidate since 1992. Pennsylvania has a very strong tradition of voting blue, and of course Donald Trump was able to flip this in the 2016 election. But what's just happened here, Flo? Let's put this into sort of metaphorical context. You've had an ocean liner that has slowly been turning away from Donald Trump into Biden's direction, right? This is a 5-deck ocean liner with lots of people on it, so it turned very slowly. And so we've finally now turned in one direction, and it's very difficult now to say that that ocean liner is going to go full circle again in Donald Trump's favor. What's happened in the state of Georgia is quite unprecedented. What we've seen here is a slow creep from the Biden campaign in the state of Pennsylvania. Donald Trump had a lead of over 600,000 votes in the state of Pennsylvania. Why? Because they counted the in-person ballots that were cast on election day first, and we know that overwhelmingly Republicans turned out for that vote. Why? Because the president told them to. What did Joe Biden and the Democratic Party tell Democratic supporters? Vote by mail, use absentee ballots. We're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. In the last 24 hours, Flo, over 120,000 new infections were confirmed in the United States and over 1,000 deaths here. So remember, we're still in the context of this pandemic. So what we've seen here in Georgia and Pennsylvania are those absentee and mail-in ballots being tabulated last and overwhelmingly Democrats have turned out for Joe Biden in terms of voting in that format. In places like Georgia, the capital, one of the big cities in Georgia is, of course, Atlanta. Who's been driving the vote in terms of voter registration in that state? A lady called Stacey Abrams. She ran for governor in the state 2 years ago, came up very, very short, did not concede the race because she felt there was voter suppression, and took it upon herself to start an organization that saw to it that people registered and that they dealt with issues of voter suppression. So you're going to hear a lot about the name Stacey Abrams. Joe Biden will probably mention her by name. He's due to speak later today in terms of turning Georgia, very possibly, remember we're not at the end here, turning Georgia blue. Pennsylvania, same story. Lots of votes coming in from the Philadelphia county. Philadelphia is one of the big centers in the state of Pennsylvania, and it's a metropolis and its surroundings. And so those are the outstanding votes. So we expect Joe Biden's lead to increase. Let's point you to Nevada, also a swing state where Joe Biden has a lead of about 11,438. The expectation is from regions like Reno and Las Vegas, heavily unionized, that Joe Biden will be able to stretch his lead there. Arizona, of course, has already been called by both the Associated Press and Associated Press and Fox News. So we're putting 253 over there. AP and Fox have him at 260, 264. If he wins Nevada, that's 6 Electoral College votes. That gives you 270. If he wins Pennsylvania, that's 20 Electoral College votes. 253, it's 273. If he wins the 16 in Georgia, that puts him over the top. So speculation is here, Joe Biden could go as high as 306 Electoral College votes, essentially the number that won Donald Trump the presidency in 2014. And this is why you're hearing more and more about a judicial avenue. We have to go through the courts. It seems to be increasingly the only path that Donald Trump has towards any hope of retaining the presidency here, Flo.
All right, let me go back to Kate. I'll come back to you, Sherwin. I do understand we need to wrap up quickly with Kate. Kate, well, the counting really isn't over. You can see that graphic behind Sherwin there. But Biden has already won more overall votes, I believe, than any presidential candidate in U.S. history. Is that correct? Can you go into that for us?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that is a phenomenal achievement. He, at 78 years old, the third time that he has tried to get this job in the United States, and third time lucky, and not just lucky, but the most votes, over 70 million and counting, for any US presidential candidate. And the reason for that is because turnout in this election has just been unprecedented, phenomenal. Both Republicans and Democrats have brought out their voters in their millions, far, far more than ever before. And this is one of the reasons that we are waiting so long for the final results, because there are quite simply so many ballots to count. And because the Democrats really push the idea of early voting and voting by mail, there are millions and millions of more mail-in ballots than there have ever been before. And of course, they take longer to count.
Can we anticipate when
on a piece of paper or on an electronic machine?
Yeah, can we anticipate when we can get those final results? It's always obviously very difficult to tell. But at a time when we're talking about mail-in votes, is there a projection in terms of when we can expect to start to hear those final results? I know it's quite a difficult question because it depends on people actually counting by hand and so forth. But really, can we kind of gauge where we are?
I think the expectation is that at some point today, Joe Biden will have enough of a lead in enough states for, it's essentially big media companies here that tend to project the winner because they have teams working behind the scenes. They're called decision desks, where they gather all this data. They have algorithms and special programs to work out percentages and so on from how many votes have been counted, how many votes are still left to be looked at, and they decide using all that data as to when they have decided it's going to be enough, they have enough information to be sure who has won each state. And that's why, interestingly, Arizona, the Associated Press and Fox News have decided, using their own mathematical resources, that that Joe Biden would win that state, but the votes are still being counted, and other big media organisations like the New York Times, CNN, etc., have not gone for that because their teams have not decided that the numbers are quite right yet. So in reality, the full official final votes will take days and days and weeks. They will not be published officially for weeks because they have got to be all verified, all counted. But the projection system that happens in the United States is when these companies and all these very, incredibly detailed mathematical issues have been sorted out. They make the projections, and there has never been a moment where that has not been the case because it's just the official numbers. Every single last ballot voted, ticked off, checked, and published in each state will take a couple of weeks.
All right, to Kate, I believe
but in terms of your question, we should have a very good chance of knowing.
All right, Kate Fisher,
by the middle of today.
Let's say goodbye to you. Kate Fisher speaking to us from Washington, our correspondent there. Thank you very much. We're going to continue then with Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York as we say goodbye to Kate Fisher in Washington. Sherwin, most Democrats, I believe, did do mail-in votes due to, and I think it's quite ironic that it was a fear of COVID that made them indeed do the mail-in votes. And these mail-in votes subsequently are what are essentially killing the Trump camp. I suppose this is where Trump sort of justifies his anger at the electoral process. Mail-ins really sort of coming through really for Biden, aren't they? And is it fair to say, I mean, I heard a pundit saying that, the black American vote that has come in through this mail-in system is really what's coming through for the Democrats. Is that correct? And of the states, I've already made a muck-up of the states at this point, so I'm going to ask you to just point us in that graphic behind you, just to show us which are those states that really kind of, if I can say, saved Biden or came through for Biden at this time.
Georgia, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
Philadelphia, Atlanta, large black populations in those cities. And so the headlines, you said you saw a pundit. I've seen a number of stories here already, how black voters, particularly black women, have saved America, right? That's the headline. I'm not saying that's the SABC's position, but that's kind of the sentiment that people have here. Black people have turned out in their numbers. It's black people that turned Joe Biden's primary race around. South Carolina, North Carolina, Stacey Abrams' work on the ground, women in particular. That's why Kamala Harris is the vice presidential nominee and Joe Biden's running mate, because it was a dip of his hat to the role that black women historically have played in the United States and in Democratic Party successes. Ask Barack Obama. Even Hillary Clinton had record turnout from black women, even though she came short. So black women have been a consistent demographic in any success of any Democratic Party candidate, whether you're talking at Senate level, in Congress, or even the president. So you're absolutely right that is a very specific demographic, specifically women, but more broadly black people in general, that have come out close to 90%. We haven't seen final figures on that yet, supporting Joe Biden, although Donald Trump has upped his support in terms of young black male vote in this country, but overwhelmingly black people turning out for the former vice president, Flo.
Now, the U.S. election results are showing that Joe Biden is or could surpass Barack Obama's popular vote record. Is that very surprising? I mean, how did the Democrats get it right, if I can say, this time around?
Well, a lot of people remember in the United States, November 3rd, Election Day, is not a public holiday as it would be in a place like South Africa and other places around the world where people don't have to go to work and rather vote. Here, people have to sort of find out whether they can get off work, a lot of people, and go and vote. And so that has always been an impediment to large turnouts in a U.S. presidential election. But COVID-19, remember, we talk about how this was the COVID-19, the pandemic election. What COVID did here is change the rules in a lot of states. You had a lot lot of early voting in a number of states, including in New York State for the first time. The length of which early voting was allowed people to go in weeks before, stand in line. There were long queues. You saw that before Election Day, to the point that there were not long queues in a lot of places on Election Day, because people had such a breadth of time in which to go and cast their ballots. In addition, we saw the surge in mail-in voting. You essentially request a mail-in ballot. Some states actually sent mail-in ballots to voters, and all you have to do is fill it out and return it to a post box, post it back through the post office, or go and drop it at a mail drop-off box. So there were many avenues and many options here, and Democrats in particular heeded the call to use this new avenue, mail-in ballots, or to vote early. And so because those mail-in ballots and absentee ballots were left for last, you are seeing this wave come in now at the end, right? Donald Trump would have felt confident. Remember what happened early on election night? He won Florida, he won Texas. I mean, these were polls were suggesting that these were going to be very tight races. And so after winning Florida, a very, very key swing state in any presidential election, Donald Trump's camp, the Trump team, thought, wow, this is going to be a replay of 2016. That was a really big, important win. And so they felt that the trajectory for the night was certainly going to hand them a win. And because those mail-in ballots, came in last, slowly, every day, 4,000 an hour, so Joe Biden has been eating into that lead. The deficit has been reduced, and now he has edged ahead. And just the way it has played itself out over the last 48 hours has been very, very difficult for the Trump campaign to accept, particularly given the fact that he has tried to undermine mail-in and absentee ballots, the credibility of this election system, talking about fraud without evidence, pointing to fraudulent activity in places like Pennsylvania, where he's now trailing places like Georgia. And remember, Georgia is a Republican-run state. The person in charge of elections is a Republican-appointed Secretary of State in the state of Georgia. I want to also just tell you what Trump tweeted. This has been flagged, so I want to preface it. It's been flagged by Twitter because it breaks Twitter's rules. But this is what the president said earlier today. I easily win the presidency of the United States with legal votes cast. The observers were not allowed in any way, shape or form to do their job, and therefore votes accepted during this period must be determined to be illegal votes. The U.S. Supreme Court must decide, right? So he's referring to places like Pennsylvania. Who have we just heard from? The Republican senator from Pennsylvania, a guy called Senator Pat Toomey. This is what he says. I saw the president's speech last night, and it was hard to watch. The president's allegations are just not substantiated. There's no evidence. The president is making allegations. He says the court should decide. Show us the evidence, Mr. President. We haven't seen it yet.
And, we're talking about his allegations, talking about fraud without any evidence. He's called into question the integrity of the elections. He's not likely to get very far with that now, is he? But, we can call out his lies. Twitter can flag his tweets, for example. But what he has to say can be quite dangerous. I believe we've lost Sherwin for now. We'll certainly be talking to him as soon as the team is able to get a hold of him. Just to re-emphasize where I was going with this issue, the fact that Trump has called into question really the integrity of the elections and how far he can actually go with that. I mean, we've seen that his lies have been indeed called out, but whether or not they're dangerous is really another story for another day in terms of whether or not these lies can be dangerous. I mean, we see what happened with the coronavirus, with COVID-19, where Trump had really been kind of confidently saying that this virus will go away, and in fact encouraging many of the Americans and his supporters hearing what he has to say, encouraging them not to adhere to social distancing rules and not wearing of masks and so forth. So really another part of where his lies could be dangerous, and that is really where I wanted to go with the conversation with Sherwin Bryce-Pease. We've heard quite significant information then this afternoon regarding those polls. The fact that Georgia, not Pennsylvania, has indeed gone blue for the first time in a very long time. That's vote counting. In fact, those visuals that we're showing you right now, vote counting happening in Georgia. In fact, they haven't voted Democrat since Bill Clinton, as Sherwin Bryce-Pease was saying there. So really a state that the Trump camp would have thought is theirs for the taking, and says a lot really about Joe Biden's popularity at this point, with counting not over yet, but Biden proving he is quite a force, as he's already won more overall votes than any presidential candidate in U.S. history at the age of 78. I mean, Trump did have a decent lead in some of these states where it is quite surprising, I suppose, for even the Democrats themselves, that Biden has managed to catch up. You know that Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes, which would mean quite a win for Biden once it is declared. The numbers that we're sitting at the moment, you know that each party would have to reach 270 to win, meaning that Biden would have to reach 270 first, or Trump 270 first, but highly unlikely as I look at the numbers for Trump at this time, as he is sitting at 213. While Biden is sitting at 253. And as I've said, in fact, some people calling it, in fact, higher for Biden, saying he's already at 264. But that hasn't been officially called yet. And we'll certainly let you know once that is the case. As you've heard already in Washington from Kate Fisher, that people are out already celebrating, Democrats celebrating at this time, saying that Joe Biden has already taken the presidency, that the Democrats have won at this time. We'll certainly give you more information. We're certainly trying to get hold of Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who we lost there on the line. He's back with us, in fact, from New York. Sherwin, apologies for that. I believe we lost you. Where I was going with my question there was, you know, Trump has called into question the integrity of the elections. He's not likely to get very far with that. But, you know, as much as Trump's lies can be called out, as much as you're raising the fact there that his tweets have been flagged by Twitter, his allegations have been questioned. But the fact of the matter is that very much of Trump's rhetoric, which really is why he was president for the last couple of years, is really quite dangerous. Let's talk about the fact that these lies, is there a chance that they could lead to, I suppose, problems of violence, or, you know, his talks can really kind of be dangerous. I'm looking at some of the tweets from Republicans and Trump supporters, and I must say it does look a little bit scary as I see those tweets.
Remember, as we've been reporting, right, we've interviewed analysts who have been warned journalists and newsrooms that these elections could go off the rails. There's been speculation for many, many months leading up to this election, particularly given the narrative put out there by the president and some of his campaign surrogates, that there'll be fraud, that you can't trust mail-in ballots, even though 5 states in this country before coronavirus only had mail-in ballots and absentee ballots as the way to vote in their elections, be they presidential, state, or whatever. So this is a tried and tested system. It might not have been as widespread as before, but it certainly was a benchmark used by various states without problems. Republican states, Democratic states, there was no issue here. So the idea, the analysis was that, why is the Trump campaign doing this? Why are they trying to undermine this process? Because I think they knew that this was going to be the result. If you have high turnout, and if you make voting more convenient for people will then tend to vote, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. And so the fear was, if you drive turnout through mail-in and absentee ballots, you are then going to get greater Democratic turnout, and that's going to hurt the chances of winning re-election. The concern here, of course, is that normally in an American democracy, you would have someone losing, challenging possibly through the courts. You can follow whatever legal process that is universal anywhere in the world. But to cast these aspersions without any evidence is creating concern that we could see violence on the streets. You know, leading up to this poll, we've seen boarded up windows in major cities. Remember, this has been a very difficult year in terms of protests and riots based on the police's relationship with particularly black minority communities in this country, the death of George Floyd, etc. There's a litany of people and examples we could use about just how tense this country was already. You've got hurricanes, you've got tornadoes, you've got wildfires in California, you have people dying at the hands of police, you have coronavirus that has decimated this country in terms of families, in terms of the economy, in terms of jobs. People are stressed out. People are stressed out in the United States and around the world. And then you have a president that is throwing gasoline and petrol on an already tense situation. So the concern absolutely is that there is not a magnanimous moment from President Trump, were he to in fact lose this election, that you are then going to rile up his supporters that are already camping outside of voting stations and where they're counting ballots in places like Detroit. Michigan, of course, going for Joe Biden. Now they're standing and protesting, some of them with weapons dangling from their shoulders, of course, because you have open carry laws in some states, and that is creating anxiety for those poll workers who are essentially just trying to do the best they can to count the votes, process the votes, and give the final tally. So we are in a very interesting moment here. If the courts do, for example, come in and unexpectedly, for example, say, well, Donald Trump has a point, he's going to win, we are going to see some volatility in the United States, because everything right now points to Joe Biden winning, and if that is not confirmed, we're going to be in some murky ground here, Flo.
Now, Sherwin, I'd heard this from a pundit. I've obviously been watching these US networks. I raised the question to one of our analysts this afternoon about the fact that there was word of perhaps people voting more against Trump than they are voting for Biden. You talk about George Floyd, for example, and I wonder, as we were discussing the black vote, if maybe that was the case when we're talking about black voters, the fact that it might not necessarily be about Joe Biden really, but the fact that we need to get Trump out of the White House. But then again, I look at what's happening in terms of Joe Biden even surpassing Barack Obama's popular vote, and that to me seems rather surprising too.
Look, I wouldn't say that Joe Biden doesn't have support. Joe Biden is a very likable person, particularly among older black women in the United States. I can't exactly explain why that would be, but certainly from what we've seen over the course of the year leading up to this election, Joe Biden is very likable, particularly with older women in this country, particularly black people. And so black people have really changed the course of this race. So I wouldn't say all people that voted for Joe Biden didn't do so because, they didn't really have an option, or it was because of a greater dislike for Donald Trump, but that too was a factor. A lot of male people that we spoke to, we interviewed someone outside a polling station the other day who quite unequivocally said, I don't like either of these candidates, but if you look at the cities we're in, if you look at how boarded up New York is and how anxious and tense people are, we need change. Joe Biden was the only option for the change that people sought. It might not have been the best option, but as Barack Obama has been saying, you're not going to get everything when you vote a certain way. You're not going to get everything in one term, but we make progress slowly. We take one step at a time. You have to keep voting that way so that we can continue on that trajectory. And what happened in 2016, if you're a Democrat supporting Barack Obama and Biden, or Hillary Clinton, is that trajectory has now stymied, right? There's a caveat in the trajectory, and the hope now, if you're a Democrat, of course, is that you can then right the ship again and continue on that trajectory. For example, healthcare, right? Healthcare, you've seen efforts from the Republican Party to try, unsuccessfully to this date, to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. There is, of course, a Supreme Court case. There is a 6-3 majority, a conservative majority in that court now that will decide the fate of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And what Joe Biden has said is we need to expand this. It's not perfect yet, but we need to make it better. We need to work with Republicans in Congress to make Obamacare more viable and acceptable to the broader population. And so that is an example of how change happens slowly anywhere, unless, of course, you have a revolution. But where does that leave us in the short term?
All right, Sherwin, we'll catch up with you, I'm sure, throughout the day, and I'll certainly be chatting to you again tomorrow. Thank you very much, as always, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, for us there in New York.